WLRN Video presents.
Welcome back, WLRN listeners, and a heart-filled welcome to those who are new to our airwaves. I sat down with TT Exulansic to discuss her YouTube channel and her unique analysis of gender ideology as a religious movement. Sit back and enjoy this conversation with a fresh and revolutionary thinker within the radical feminist movement. This is Emiliann Lorenzen with WLRN, and I'm here with Exulansic. And some of you may know her from her YouTube channel, TT Exulansic. She does a lot of videos about the trans movement and specifically the medicalization of trans people, and also the running theory that gender ideology is a religion. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So just a little bit about my background. I'm coming at this as someone with a degree in gender and women's studies. I also have a degree in linguistics, as well as and those are both bachelor's and then master's in speech pathology. And so I'm somebody who has a very, very high resolution on why these pronoun prayers are not okay, why they're not going to work. They're just not. And and then in addition, I ran atheist/secular student clubs in my high school, in my college, and in my graduate school. So I spent a lot of time thinking about secularism and the rights of people without religion to be free of religion. And what is a religion legally? So that's kind of where I'm coming at this from.
Okay. And you already mentioned pronoun prayers. So can you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so we are being asked to use what were originally called preferred pronouns and has now morphed into just pronouns. Those are my pronouns. And we are being asked to use these to acknowledge a belief that another person has something called a gender identity, and that this gender identity does not match their physical body in some way. And therefore our native languages rule about which pronoun we assign to which people, that doesn't count because they have a religious belief that they are not their physical body. And therefore I need to acknowledge this belief as true by using the pronouns of this entity. I don't believe that they have such an entity. And so I am going to only use according to the rules of my native language, unless I make a speech error, which often happens and is also my right to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you've used the term gender ideities before. So kind of being a trans woman or non-binary is a form of God worship.
Yeah.
And prayer, traditionally prayer means to be with, right? You're communing with God. So that pronoun prayer makes a lot of sense when you talk about it as pronoun prayers to the gender ideety, and you as a gender atheist not wanting to commune with that deity.
Yeah, I don't want to pretend to think that I think it's there. I don't think it's there. And I'm being asked to pray to it in order that this deity relieves their mental distress in some way, relieves either a symptom of mental illness or blesses them with euphoria. Lately, it's become that it's not just that I have to refrain from triggering their dysphoria. Now I actively have to do something to trigger their euphoria. Well, I'm being asked to participate in what I consider to be a sexual interaction at that point. Like, I'm not interested in triggering your euphoria. Find another partner.
Right. Yeah, and those terms dysphoria and euphoria, if you think of euphoria being euphoric, that is a very temporary and rare state of being. A lot of times people experience euphoria, and they're aware of experiencing euphoria when they're doing drugs, right?
Yeah.
So
it's an emotional extreme. And so people who have an emotional illness, who are already prone to emotional extremes, they might be a little bit more prone to thinking that that's something to go towards because they're ill. Like we're talking about people who have an illness with the word dysphoria in the name. They have an emotional illness. We can't just be catering to placating their emotional illness. We can't restructure society to placate their emotional illness.
Oh, I lost my thought. It's okay. But yeah, and you look at euphoria, utopia, dysphoria, dystopia. Like, we know what those mean, especially we know what dystopia means, because as a culture, we're obsessed with dystopian stories. So they need to realize that when they say gender dysphoria, they're talking about the lowest of the low. And how are you going to go from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high? And I guess that's through worship, through through a spiritual experience. Oh, that's what I was going to say. It's that spiritual belief that some like New Ages that are pretty mainstream, who would say that you always have to live like happy, joyous, and free, right? There's no dark side ever. And you always have to like look on the positive side, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this there's a degree of black and white thinking and emotion and extreme thinking there of not being comfortable with the fact that like most of your life will be neither euphoric nor dysphoric.
Right.
And you need to stop feeling like if you're so unhappy that you need this extreme happiness to relieve the unhappiness, that's a problem. There should be a middle ground there. You should be comfortable just being.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you do kind of separate this religion into different sects. The two main ones I've noticed are the Church of the Non-Binaries and and trans proper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
The overarching. I put the Church of Trans as overarching because they came first. So for the same reason we call Spanish, Italian, and French, we call them Latinate because Latin came first. That is why Latin is the umbrella for those languages. But it has split. Originally, it was that some men want to be women and some women want to be men, but there's still the two sexes. And so in that paradigm, the gender binary was the idea that you are that somebody that looks like a woman automatically has female genitals, and that's the binary. So cis man and cis woman are the binary where a woman has to act like this and have this body, or a man has to be like that and have this body. Then that had a schism into the non-binaries who believe that there is the icon of man and icon of woman are completely independent of genitals, and that's just a belief that they tend to go along. And so there is an idea of the cis man and the cis woman that those labels matter, but those are subcategories of these binary labels of man and woman, and that's anybody who identifies with either of those two icons. And then from there we have all these other non-binary identities that have been invented. That you can identify with, and they're all valid, and so it's about so in that construction, the binary is man and woman as the gender identities, irrespective of your sex, and it's also the belief that there's only two sex developmental pathways and not these third or fourth ones that are defined, it seems, by whether you've had surgery or whether you've taken these drugs. They want those to be new sex categories that are studied independently. They want non-binary, the sex, to be on your driver's license. They want non-binary, the sex, to be studied medically as somehow not a subcategory of the first two. They want it to be a third category, which is absurd.
And then they misuse intersex people to, prove their point and pursue their gains.
Yeah, and part of the problem is the term intersex implies that it's a third category and not two subsets of the first two. They're males and females with disorders of sexual development. But there's things the intersex conditions you have are contingent on what sex path you went down.
Well, what's interesting is that there's points where the non-binaries and the trans obviously don't agree. I mean, I would think that non-binary people by virtue would get on trans people's nerves because they are saying that there's pretty much no such thing as man or woman. So if there's no such thing as man and woman, why are you transitioning, right?
Yeah. So this idea that it's all about looking like the icon, the gender icon, whereas the more traditional trans, especially the sect that I call the denominational sect of Our Lady of the Perpetual Hormone Replacement Therapy, they actually tend to believe that there is a biological reason that their brain wants estrogen or wants testosterone, that it's not about getting the breasts, it's about their brain physically needs estrogen for some reason, and the breasts are a side effect. and they're unhappy without the breasts only because that is their brain's way of recognizing they don't have the estrogen. And there's theories along that. So that was the one that I first encountered more when I was 2009, 2010, when I was first encountering it in school.
When you were in college?
Yeah, when I was getting my gender studies degree.
Okay. And I think you said before that you're a detransitioner.
Yeah. So during that time, it seemed to make a lot of sense. I always had a degree of gender dysphoria in terms of being very, very unhappy with the idea that other people expected things of me because I was female and the way that females are treated. And there was also related to trauma. I think that there's a degree to which people will, some people will come to the conclusion that they're the wrong sex, regardless of what society you're in, regardless of what circumstances there are, because I think it in some cases is a reaction to trauma, where everything feels wrong first, and then from there you conclude that you're the wrong sex to try to explain it. Mm-hmm. I think that if the trauma happens early enough, that can happen. But then it wasn't until I really got to college and was exposed to all these ideas and all my friends were doing it and all that, where it was like, oh no, you know what, maybe I would actually be happier pursuing these things. Mm-hmm. So, but ultimately they're placebo treatments. And as I progressed in actual therapy, not gender therapy, but like actual therapy, you stop needing the splint. You stop needing to support the broken limb, basically, because you heal. So then you stop needing to be one of the two gender icons. You can just be yourself and stop caring so much.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I think it's a better way to be.
Absolutely. Do you believe there's anything as true trans, that there's anybody who needs to transition?
No, I believe that there's true gender dysphoria, a mental illness, and I believe that there is a person who believes in the gender religion. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it exists as a biological category. And in fact, the idea of the biological explanations I've encountered to explain how it's somehow a natural category and not a socially constructed one, slash belief structure or subculture, it just doesn't make sense. Like there's the claim that, well, some people have female brains, but they're in a male body. Well, setting aside, how did that happen? How did that happen? They both developed at the same time. They weren't assembled later. They developed in the same time, in the same chemical soup. So how would that even happen? If a male brain and a female brain exists, but both brain types exist in both sexes, doesn't that show that there's no such thing as a male or female brain? Doesn't that mean that we've kind of arbitrarily decided that some belong with some? If we know that they both exist in both sexes, that's what they're telling us, is that both brain types exist in both sexes, but some of them are wrong because of miracle. How did that happen? How did we decide that?
Yeah, it's a very pseudoscientific belief structure. I mean, it's
motivated. They want to get to a particular conclusion.
Mm-hmm. And
it's not honest reasoning. It's not scientific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've seen you look at studies where it's like, this isn't a study. This is basically an essay. You're trying to prove a point.
The tooth size one was the funniest one. I think that they just took a lot of because like they do Invisalign now with these I just had Invisalign 3D X-ray wands that can go in and like actually get this extremely detailed visual topography of your teeth very quickly. And they have a lot of that. They have a lot of that data now. So they just ran it through a statistical processor, found some correlations, cross-referenced it with self-reported trans status, and concluded things. It's called p-hacking. It is not science. It's reverse science.
Yeah, and a lot of us in the general population, don't know what real science looks like. It says it's a study, it's from Stanford, it's from wherever.
Peer reviewed. It's peer reviewed, it's got numbers, It's got data, it's real science. It's in the scientific journal. Like it's the institutional capture is incredible. Like it's just so profoundly pseudoscientific that future generations that are not raised in this toxicity are going to immediately see through it. And they're going to wonder how was it that we were so foolish to have ever thought this seemed legit.
And as a speech pathologist, do you ever have to deal with any of these kind of trans identities or ideology like leaking into your profession?
It actually has been, unfortunately, leaking to my profession, to my shock and horror. I assume the rest of my field is going to catch up, because there is simply no way for us to accommodate pronoun prayers and accommodate people with aphasia, people who've lost language from a brain injury. They can't be in the workplace if everyone's harassing them for making pronoun errors. We can't do it. And we can't accommodate them without marking them as somebody with a disability. Their aphasia might be so mild that it only affects pronouns, but that still stigmatizes them. You can't reasonably accommodate everybody. You can't reasonably accommodate people who can't bow their head at work while still having a practice that requires everyone bow their head at work, without exposing the person who can't bow their head as someone with a disability involving their ability to bow their head. You can't do it. You just can't have this practice. It's illegal. It's illegal at work. It will only inspire discrimination and hostility.
Yeah, I like how you brought up ableism in one of your videos, because I'll be honest, ableism for me, I just lumped it into like, oh, that's just another ism. You know, it's just another one of those things to throw at us. Because I know this one woman who identifies as non-binary, and she's the first to like edit out tweets that she wants to share. And she's like, I edited it out for ableism. And she crossed out the word crazy. Like, oh, that's crazy. And I'm just like, that's just a phrase. Like, is it really hurting people with mental illness? I don't know. But what you're talking about sounds more concrete.
We need a word for behavior that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You need to be able to say that somebody is acutely crazy. I've been acutely crazy. I'm not permanently like that. You need to have a discernment to know when somebody is crazy or sane. And you shouldn't stigmatize somebody for having a history of illness. And just because someone has an illness, it doesn't mean that they are crazy. But if you're on the top of a police car, completely nude, screaming at police officers, you are crazy in that moment. I'm sorry, you are crazy. You're acting crazy. That is a crazy way to act. We need a term for that, and that is a bad thing. We need to recognize that this person's having a problem. They need help.
Yeah, it's the erasure of language, because that's how I got aware of ableism, was through like lists that would get passed around on social media of like words you cannot say anymore because they're ableist. And it's a lot of that, like crazy, insane.
Superstitious. That's not how you get rid of ableism.
No.
It's trying to get rid of racism by not noticing skin color ever.
Yeah.
Don't look at it. Still look at it.
Exactly.
People who whisper the word black because they don't want to be racist.
Yeah.
Not racist, but, you know, he has...
And what gets me, honestly, is a lot of these people are intelligent. Like, a lot of these people I went to school with, like, I know they're not dumb people, but they're just being duped by the be kind kind of zeitgeist that's going on.
Which is selfish. You know, they want to be seen as being kind, so they don't want to think too hard. Because, and so in reality, they're actually doing something quite awful. Because they don't want to see themselves as somebody that would do something bad.
Yeah.
It's very narcissistic to not acknowledge that you are capable of evil. Like, we're all capable of evil if we're not careful, or if we're in the wrong brain state. We're all capable of it. We're all one brain injury away from doing horrible things that we don't want to do. I have a cat.
Yeah. It looks like my cat.
It's this giant Maine Coon.
Oh.
Hand for scale.
Huh?
Hand for scale.
He's so cute.
Giant head.
So another issue with this is autism. Like, you've been hitting this one pretty hard too. What's that girl's name? Archie?
Yeah. Archie / Gwen, as Dr. Cassandra Lai, her butcher, dead name her to no effect, because dead naming is only a sin when we do it.
Yeah. So they're taking advantage of autistic people as well. I'll admit I don't know a whole lot about autism, other than that it's neurodivergence. They struggle with emotion sometimes, or empathy, or
the two main and I'm not a psychologist, but I do diagnose the social pragmatic side of it. There's kind of two main branches. One is sensory development, and then the other is cat hair. No. And then the other is social pragmatics. And social pragmatics is your ability to understand other people's perspective and other people's mental state, what other people are likely trying to do, whether somebody is lying, for instance, whether somebody is taking advantage of you, whether somebody has negative intentions towards you, even if they're acting like they don't. autistic people are going to, as a rule, have a much more difficult time telling when they're being conned. Just by definition, that's the hallmark of the disorder. They don't know when they're being conned. Mm. there's unless you're an autistic person who has had a lot of treatment for the social pragmatic deficits that are the hallmark, the core feature of the disorder, you are going to have a disability. Your disability is going to make it more difficult for you and make you more likely to not notice when you're being conned, when you're being lied to, when you're being manipulated, which of course other kids notice. And that creates problems for you growing up.
Yeah. And then it creates this sense of feeling weird, right? And then they're more prone to this, I'm born in the wrong body.
Yeah. So part of the deficit is that they don't have an idea of like transitions are surprising because they're not really tracking what other people are paying attention to as well. It's called joint attention. So when, the class suddenly transitions, it's a big change that they didn't expect. And adults might come over and like yank them. Stuff happens with them. So they have more difficulty fitting in socially. They're less able to tell when they're being taken advantage of. And this movement is just completely hijacking it. She talks about her sensory deficits a lot. You can see her language disorder come out in one of her most recent videos. She talked about, she when she was telling someone else, she said it's very hard. You just went through this big process. You're hurting. She says you're hurting. 2 sentences later, she says, when they pulled the drainage tube out, it was autistic sensory overload, and I screamed, but it didn't hurt. So because nobody specifically taught her that the word hurt does in fact apply to that sensation, in her mind, it didn't help hurt because she has a very idiosyncratic definition of the word hurt and the definition of the word pain, because those words are taught. Those concepts are taught socially. And she has autism. I fully believe that she has autism. It's clearly high-functioning autism. High-functioning has not saved her. So if I say that someone is a high-functioning autistic person, I'm not saying they have the mild kind. It's not a big deal. Right. Clearly hers is profoundly disabling socially and sensory-wise. And that has implications, such as not knowing that if someone yanks a tube out of your recently surgically operated on chest and you scream, it's because it hurt. It is, in fact, something that hurt you just now. So she has a very, very, very disturbed understanding of herself. She needed a lot of therapy. Instead, she got an amputation from a doctor who was so lazy, so greedy, so callous, that she actually coached her into choosing to be permanently disfigured and to permanently lose major erogenous areas, to permanently lose functions. Bodily functions, which is a permanent disability. When you permanently lose the ability to lactate, you've acquired a permanent disability legally under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Amendments Act of 2008 specifically. And she is the reason that she gave, which I'm sure Dr. Cassandra Lai and then her girlfriend Mac, who's a piece of work, coached her into believing, was that she has this extreme squeamishness was her reason. She said, I know that I'm extremely squeamish. I didn't think I would be able to look at myself in the mirror with black rotting nipples that might fall off and be able to tolerate that. I'm just too squeamish. I looked at pictures of it, which means that, Cassandra's like, you really want this to happen? This could happen to you, manipulating her. And probably because there's a higher profit margin on the no nip option. And so she goes through all that. And another one of her very recent videos, someone said, what surprised you about getting it? One of the things that surprised her apparently was how squeamish she was looking in the mirror. This is not a person where point A and point B are connecting in her brain, which is the long distance underconnectivity theory of autism. She is not well integrated. So she says wildly contradictory right next to each other. Because one of them she's been coached into thinking, and the other one she came to on her own. And they contradict because she hasn't had therapy. It's unfortunate. It's extremely predictable. I treat social pragmatic language disorders. That's something speech pathologists treat, is the social thinking. I treat people like her. People come to me, they have these problems. I help them through them so that they don't get taken advantage of like this so easily. Wow. It's a nightmare what she's going through.
Yeah, and it's, a lot of people have said it's eugenics at this point. They're sterilizing and mutilating and experimenting on autistic and mentally ill people.
Yep. Tale as old as time. She's been identified as having a disability that has rendered her socially undesirable in some way. She has been labeled, people have bought into this idea that she's also in this category that is terminal. So she is got feelings cancer. So any level of mutilation is justified to keep the feelings cancer from spreading and give her those extra few weeks to see her kids walk the stage at graduation or whatever. That logic justifies it if we're talking about actual cancer. It doesn't justify it feelings cancer. Feelings cancer won't kill you. You can actually just wait, take a benzo, calm down, if it's prescribed.
Yeah.
But we're allowing people to be labeled as permanently, irrevocably, terminally, acutely, imminently mentally ill by their own hand. And therefore, anything is justified. Therefore, any negative outcome is going to be linked right back to that original problem. It's not going to be blamed onto the transition healthcare. It's always the original dysphoria. It's always proof of how much they needed the healthcare.
Yeah. And they champion these doctors. They're like, oh, they really are helping me. They're doing the best they can. Even though, like the guy who had the tracheal shape, even though I can't talk, but you did a great job.
You can't feel it. That was so horrible to hear him talking about that, about going and, oh yeah, he moved the muscles around and he got rid of the fat and it was this big major thing. And it's was that discussed at all? It seemed like you didn't expect that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's obvious malpractice going on.
I mean, that he's got a severe disability and the surgical revision, it sounds like it did help. He does sound mildly better, but it's once you have even a little bit of scar tissue there in an area that's constantly moving, you swallow about once a minute. And so he's got something pulling on scar tissue once a minute. Over time, that does cause it to spread. And things just also naturally harden and calcify, get more brittle and less stretchy as you age. So he's young and strong and muscular now. What happens if he actually has to undergo cancer treatment in 5 years, loses a lot of weight, and now he's so weak that he physically can't generate the forces needed to overcome the scar tissue? Now he's on an NG tube, and or a PEG tube, because he needs food in order to survive the cancer treatment. I've treated people like this too. I have a lot of skilled nursing experience too. I've seen things. You can get some interesting problems happening from small. And I have an issue with my neck too that causes. It's a small bit of scar tissue in a very inconvenient place that can't be fixed. And I've known about it for over 10 years now. So I've watched it get worse slowly. It's no fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's and that's something that you were probably born with, right?
For Eagle syndrome, it develops. So when you're born, you have a very different ratio of connective tissue and bone. And then as you grow, your bones both harden and then merge. So you have fewer bones as you get older. And so there's a lot of changing that happens during development. So my issue, it was probably programmed that way to begin with, since at least utero. My suspicion is that there might have been a mild toxic exposure that caused some Hox gene irregularity, but I don't actually know for sure. I just have a suspicion about what it was. It should be vitamin A exposure, high dose. In any case. So over time, part of it got developed into bone, part of it develops into a ligament, part of it develops into cartilage. And so you end up with a structure where you've got your larynx and you've got a bone and then you've got ligaments suspending them. And for whatever reason, the bone is too long and then the ligament is calcified.
Okay.
So it doesn't move and stretch the way that it should. And that area moves a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something that you can't control. It's something that happened. And what's getting me is that these people are getting surgeries that are giving them disabilities. I mean,
yeah, they're throwing it away. They don't know what they're throwing away. I was horrified, watching Sam's video. Because I really know how much this might come to just, I don't know. I was that excited when I got it diagnosed and was told that they might be able to fix it.
Right.
And then I went through the surgery for it and they can't fix one side. So that was 10 years ago. So it's just,
Yeah.
he's still optimistic, you know,
Mhm.
but clearly he knows, he can feel that it's still adhered. And he's aware of the fact that the surgeon even said, you know, I had to leave most of the scar tissue. I can't remove the scar tissue. I can just cut it. So there's, you know, human body is not mass produced. You get one shot at your body. And then once you've blown it, it's over. And then you just wait to die. That's bleak. There are things that, you know, keep trying. There are small things you can do to improve. I do a lot to manage it and to minimize the spread. I don't just like lie here going, why me? But there's a degree that once you have a disability, this is just your life now, and it limits you, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, 'cause this movement kind of treats bodies like we just have parts that we can move around and sew and stitch, and
Top of the list.
like we're robots or something. And
Warehouses of skin was the term that Dr. Crane used of the Crane Center.
what was it?
Dr. Crane of the Crane Center. He did this incredible Facebook Live where he was talking about, among other things, how he realized that he doesn't have to pay for cadaver skin to patch the many fistulas he forms because his patient is a warehouse of skin. Okay, Bill. Okay, Buffalo Bill. Okay, Sabrina from TikTok.
Oh my goodness. And have you seen that leaked video of Diane Ehrensaft? I believe it was her who she was at like a talk, and she was
Dr.
saying
Melinda.
if you get your breast removed, you can always get some put on later if you regret it.
I've definitely heard that clip. I didn't know it was Dr. Mellenballer, Dr. Ehrensaft. I call her that because she.
Oh no, it wasn't Ehrensaft. I'm sorry, it was Joanne, the one in LA.
Olson or Olson
Yes.
Kennedy.
Olson Kennedy.
I've definitely heard that clip. I heard that clip on the Heritage Foundation's amazing puberty blocker panel, gender transitioning panel that they put together. They've actually done 2 really good panels on that. Yeah. So I've heard that. Dr. Crane also in that same Facebook Live, somebody asked him whether their breast might grow back. And he said, have I ever seen breasts grow back? No. Well, only when they gain 30 to 40 pounds. And I'm like, okay. Do you have a lipo machine, and are you giving these 16-year-olds quid pro quo here? Why would you tell a girl that? There's no reason to tell a girl that unless you want to convince her to trade something for lipo to keep her boobs from growing back. Boobs that you know won't grow back because you removed them. You physically removed them, surgeon. They're not going to grow back. You're just scaring them so that they won't lipo, so that you can continue to get either make money or make something else.
Yeah, you don't get your breasts back, that's for sure. I mean, even when women go through pregnancy and lactation, their breasts are never the same, you know.
Yeah.
And that's natural, but it's just like, I don't know, I've had a child, so I know how different my body is now. And for somebody to do that surgically, it's just, it's beyond me, you know. And it makes me sad for these really young people.
Yeah. I was very close to somebody that had a mastectomy when she was about 22, I think 23. And she was less than 6 months out from a head injury, a major head injury, which angers me a lot the older I get.
Mm-hmm.
She'd been hit by a car. Everyone knew. She went to the hospital. It was very much in her records.
Well, does she regret it now, or?
Not to my knowledge. We lost touch. Last I heard, she was working out, and she was still very much involved. But you know, the thing about going through these major bodily alterations is that it's hard to go back.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, done that to yourself.
Yeah.
People do it, but psychologically, it's hard to admit that maybe that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Took a lot of the mystery out of it for me, though.
So did you consider those sorts of things at one point?
Yeah, it was the thing to do. It was it was a communal, like, and I was encouraged too by peers too to feel like, you know, maybe the reason I was having panic attacks, maybe the reason that I was having the mental illness symptoms I was having was because I had let it go on the back burner. Maybe if I got top surgery, that would be the answer. Was something I was encouraged to feel and think, both by peers and by a partner I was with. So Well, that was a toxic time.
Yeah. And have you said before that you're a lesbian?
Yes.
Okay. So have you seen within the lesbian community how this trans movement has affected that?
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is just aimed right at lesbians and gays, trying to convert lesbian and gay people, because it's very, very predictable to feel, for a lot of gays and lesbians at least, to feel alienated from their sex and from their gender expectations because they can't meet them. You know, you're expected to want to be with a man, and you try to be with a man, and then it just keeps not working. And you're like, why? And they seem to notice something's off, and then they start resenting you, and you resent them back. Something's missing, and it's just like, so it's normal. It's normal to feel that way, and it's also normal if you're a woman to feel upset with the fact that you can't be the kind of woman that your culture tells you to be. So it's normal to then feel, and then because of cultural misogyny, it's also normal to not empathize with women very well, easily. So you end up in a situation where it's a lot easier for you to feel like you if you look like a male. You feel a lot more normal, but you're not.
Yeah. And then the obliteration of our community and culture, because, you know, even just trying to date or even know how to date women, you know, I had a friend who was like, well, why don't you just watch lesbian movies? I'm like, I do all the time. And I know that they're really unrealistic. And that's not how I'm going to get a girl. And so we've lost that kind of where we can coach each other, I guess. Like,
Yeah,
at least
it's an attack on gay and lesbian cultural memory, because gay and lesbian culture is a natural culture. It will appear. It just will appear because it is a normal, natural human variation to be exclusively oriented towards one or the other sex, or to be oriented towards both sexes. That is natural. You are one of those three.
Mm-hmm.
So the cultures that come up, and you're very unlikely to be born into a non-heteronormative society. So the gay experience, the lesbian experience, is a natural, predictable experience. And that culture can either form and thrive and be allowed to have cultural exchange for the betterment of gays and lesbians, or it can be targeted and disrupted. And right now it's being targeted and disrupted by the forces of homophobia, who do not want us to be able to talk about our experiences with each other, to find each other, and to be happy.
Yeah. And it's sad because it kind of happened. I don't know if it happened within the culture, but it happened as the culture accepted T as part of the acronym.
Trojan horse.
Yeah.
And they just copied that experience and tried to make up their own version of that. They want transgender to be as biological of a culture. They really do, but it's not. Transgender is a social construct.
Mm-hmm.
You know, gay and lesbian existed prior to society. Transgender cannot possibly exist prior to society. You can't have gender expectations without a society.
Yeah. Have you seen that movie from the 90s, Better Than Chocolate?
No, I haven't. I think I've heard of it.
Okay. I was told to watch it. It's great. And it's okay. But so it's a lesbian movie. And then there's a trans woman in it, of course. And she's in love with this butch woman. And the butch woman at first is like, no. And then by the end of the movie, sorry, I'm ruining it for everybody who's never seen it, but whatever. It came out in the 90s, guys. But they end up together at the end. Okay. And there's also this horrible bathroom scene where the trans woman, or, you know, the trans identified male, goes into the women's restroom, and this drunk lady starts like beating him with her purse, like we would ever do that. But I'm just like, get out of my bathroom. And then the two.
I have an extremely strong fight response.
You have a flight response? Yeah.
Training. So I will fight. If the wrong person startles me, we are now fighting to the death.
Okay.
And I will and until I realize that the situation doesn't call for it, or until the threat is neutralized. One of the two.
Yeah.
So and we need to be aware of that, because that's not fair to people who have that reaction, to put them in situations where false positives go up.
Mm-hmm.
And if you allow non-predator males to enter the female-only spaces, you are increasing the risk that a false positive will happen. And that will lead to violence that could have been avoided. Because women are allowed to fight back, and women are allowed to be startleable in states of undress because of the problem of rape. We're allowed to have post-traumatic reactions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they want to say we're not allowed to have that anymore.
Yeah,
We are.
we're bigots. But yeah, so the protagonist lesbians come in and they're like, no, and they're saving the trans-identified male. But the trans-identified male and the butch woman end up together at the end of the movie. And they get married. I'm just like, did nobody back in those days think for a moment, why are those two able to get married, but the lesbian couple can't? Like, oh my goodness. So it's been happening for a long, I mean, it's been happening way longer, like since like at least the 70s, this trans stuff. But
Yeah, I was actually asked to write a foreword, I think, to a translation of the transsexual empire. That is, I've not done yet, but is in progress.
into which language?
French.
Okay.
I don't write in French, but hopefully someone will help.
Do you speak French?
I understand a lot of French, actually. I have a French English bilingual in my family.
Oh, nice.
So I've grown up around it. Not as much as Spanish though, but I can usually parse it and read it reasonably well. I can't produce it though. No practice speaking it.
That's pretty neat. So speaking of books, have you thought about writing a book, like about the?
I'm working on one that's supposed to be kind of a taxonomy of the trans cult, and just I think it's going to be ultimately geared more towards parents, like warnings. Here are concrete examples of why it's bad. Here's how the religion is structured. Here's the path that kids are set on. You know, here's the consequences for these specific individuals who published about it. So I was going to call that one Trans Rights.
Yeah.
RITES. Something about that. So I'm working on that one right now.
Yeah, I think that'd be really great. I actually sent a few parents who are dealing with ROGD kids your video where you take down Diane Ehrensaft, and they loved it. They found it really helpful.
Bad. Why is she so bad?
I mean, I started laughing so hard when you pointed out she's literally calling these kids fruits. This kid might be a fruit salad. Oh my god!
You that no gay people at any point participated in that whole project. That far with that metaphor, because there's other metaphors you can use. There are in fact other examples. She could have called them like fire trucks versus bikes. You know, like there's no reason that you needed fruit.
Yeah. So one thing that I forgot to ask in the beginning, but why did you start making videos?
So I had been making videos about linguistics, and in pursuit of my videos about linguistics, I had also gotten into my thinking of math concepts and how that applies to language. And one of those math concepts that applies to language was one I made a video about, was that the difference between a category and a spectrum. And 1 and 2 are categorically different, even though there is a spectrum of other numbers that are not 1 and 2 between 1 and 2. So it's important to understand that when you're dealing with math, that these things matter. And as an example, I said males and females are categorically different. It's incredibly important to understand that because of things like difference in medical symptoms for heart attacks. And then at the same time, the alphabet soup people seem to be trying to solve Zeno's paradox, which is the idea that if you are trying to get from point A to point B, you have to go half as far, and then you have to go half as far again, and you have to go half as far again. So you should never get there, because each time you're only going half as far, but you do. So there's a way to overcome infinity somehow. So they're trying to solve the problem of Zeno's paradox by adding letters. They're trying to go halfway again, and represent everybody in one acronym. You can't do that. You have to come up with a label that captures everybody. And in doing so, you are going to lose some of that granularity. You're going to lose the divisions. You have to do that, though. It doesn't work otherwise. So I got called a TERF a bunch of times immediately. So yeah, I was like, it just kind of clicked that, like, oh, they're acting like a religion. They are a religion. That's why this is happening. That's why they're going out. And at the same time, Jessica Ann Pinn, who's at Mediclit on Twitter and is a clitoris health educator and researcher who's done a lot of good work. She was they were going after her for using the term female anatomy and for describing the clitoris as female. And I was like, okay, if we're getting the concept of woman as distinct from man out of medical textbooks, women will die. Women will die. That the only result of that is that women and girls die. So it's time to dig my heels in and start calling this out, because it's we know where this goes. It ends in ISIS not allowing women to go to the doctor unless they go to a female doctor, except it's ISIS, so there's no female doctors because women are allowed to go to school. Some hills are there to be a turf on. they're obsessed with flags for a reason. They're call us turf for a reason. They are playing a game. They're playing the game of capture the turf. Yeah. Plant your flag on it. And meanwhile, women will die. And we can't perfect language to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a complete lack of understanding of women's history and the history of feminism. I mean, which I think as a culture is very deliberate. I mean, the fact that women's history is an elective, and because for myself, I've gone through school and I chose to never take a women's study course just because I was studying other things. But it wasn't until towards the end of grad school that I got involved in this conversation. And I started researching second wave feminism and women's history and all of that on my own. And how hard it is to find some of these books and how they're not talked about, how these feminists aren't talked about. You go from women's suffrage to like those weird hippies who burn their bras to, and that's the narrative, right?
People will just uncritically accept the propaganda, even feminists. It's really sad to see that matriarchy is some kind of a myth, that there's never been a stable matriarchy, or that matriarchies would automatically immediately get eaten by surrounding patriarchies. It's just dumb. It's just so stupid and ignorant and clearly motivated propaganda wise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this ideology is definitely preying on even our naivete as a culture. Like there is very little women's culture or gay and definitely lesbian culture anymore. And it definitely preys on that. And, it's kind of interesting because these women I see who criticize the label of not like other girls, right? They're like, oh, that's so sexist. But it's like, but you're calling yourself non-binary. Like you're doing the same
You're saying you're not like other girls. You're saying that if I don't declare myself non-binary, then that says something about me. Because if I was like you, I would also be doing this. You were saying that you're not like me. That's this idea that we need to include non-binaries. You're the ones who excluded yourself from the label. My label includes you. My understanding of women includes women that think that they're non-binary. You are not excluded from the label. Stop cosplaying.
Yeah. Let's see. It's about all the questions I had. Is there any like announcements you got going on? Any like projects or?
Well, I made a new shirt, although it's still they have to edit it a little bit, but it's going to be the definition of my new word, rowl. Roll, I guess it's actually pronounced. I always want to say it rowl because I'm American, and that's how you pronounce prowl. And growl. So, but roll is how her name is actually pronounced. And so to roll is to produce pro-woman, pro-child, pro-science, anti-pseudoscience, anti-religious, theocratic, impulse, anti-church trends content online, or to reiterate such content in online or in person to try to pique other people. That is rolling. So to use it in that's the transitive form would be like you're actually making the post. So to roll a post means to post something that does that. It also intransitively means to refuse something unjust, to refuse an unjust demand.
Nice. And those are fun. That's a fundraiser, right?
Yeah, that shirt is there. Although this time it's no minimum, so we're not waiting to hit a threshold. But yeah, it's on custom ink on my YouTube.
Nice.
And my website is exulansic.com, and that points to the YouTube. If you want to just write at random places, or you can have it made into a QR code and make stickers out of it or something.
Oh, nice.
Not to shamelessly self-promote, but I feel like this content is important.
Mm-hmm.
I take a very psychology kind of, it's very informed by B.F. Skinner's work, and Piaget, especially as a speech pathologist. We have a lot of training in that. And B.F. Skinner, one of his amazing things that he showed was that if you can teach animals categories to the point where they can accurately sort new pictures into the category that you taught them. So you can teach them to recognize which of 4 pictures is a tree, even if you've never taught them that this picture is called a tree. If you teach them what a tree is by showing them other pictures of trees and then rewarding them when they pick out the tree, they will mentally form the category tree, and then they will accurately sort. So animals are people too. And that's my theory here, is that if I just show, for instance, enough examples of phalloplasties going horribly wrong, people will be able to form the mental category of phalloplasty more accurately and figure out, oh, these predictably go horribly wrong. This is what a phalloplasty actually is. It's not the sales pitch. It's this nightmare that this person's going through. So that's my thinking and why they're grouped the way that they are. And I just believe in people's innate ability to recognize patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you want to check out her Exulansic's YouTube channel, a TT Exulansic, I do like the playlists because you can go through and the vaginoplasty volumes, the phalloplasty files. Yeah.
Now we have tracheal tracts.
The what?
Now we have the tracheal tracts.
Oh, yeah.
The hectic hysterectomies, the mastecticism series, Church of the Non-Binaries, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So dive in. So thank you so much for your time. It's great speaking with you.
Thank you for listening to this WLRN exclusive interview. Check out the description box below for how to contact TT Exulansic. Like, share, and subscribe for more interviews and rich content. Also, be sure to go to womensliberationradionews.com for our monthly podcast, which is out the first Thursday of every month. See you soon.